Hey guys, I wanted to go ahead and take a quick look at some of the things that I had changed when I did my integration work from the POC into the main project. And I was going to start with the scene here, and I'll go ahead and play it. Everything's working. We have the predator here, shark. We have controls working. Props are working. As you can see, the bubblers. I went ahead and defined the edge collision areas for the coral here, so that that would work. So he's bouncing in and back and forth. Prop, the bubblers work. So it looks good. It's working good, and so you'll have a chance to go look through there and see how it's put together. One of the main changes I made was that I removed the game code from the camera and I put it onto a game object. So you can see the plaid game object is here, and then anything else that's scene specific out here as well. And I try to keep things off the main camera. One of the reasons is if you can imagine having a second camera in the scene, you disable one to go to the other, and you've got your main game code on there, you might encounter some serious problems. So I try to keep those types of things separate. If its job is to be a game engine, then I create a game engine object. If it's something for the camera, then I'll place it on the camera, of course. So that's kind of the reason why that. Throughout here, I went ahead and added bubble containers. Those are the bubblers. They're now prefabs. Propeller is a prefab, and I changed the exit trigger to use a collider, just a box collider without an image, and renamed it exit trigger. And that's in case we have multiple exits, and that would make sense to, duplicate and then move and rotate to wherever you needed it, and it would do the same job, and it kind of stands alone, which is real nice. When you get a chance, take a look at the shark and how he's put together as far as the controllers for animation as well as his movement. But one of the main things I wanted to point out that I changed was on the player. Now, the player script is still here. Physics, excuse me, physics, movable object, health, and sorting helper are all still there. But one thing you'll notice is missing, obviously, is the input controller 2D object. And one of the main reasons I did that was because the input controller, input manager, anytime you're doing input, you're trying to get update, and that's what you have to do. You have to loop update, and you have to see what has come through. And when you find out, you get a hit, like a button click, you make a call to screen to world, and then you do a raycast, and that's for obvious reasons to pass on to movable and caster. And one of the problems is that update is in this instance is kind of expensive of what it does. Screen to world point and raycasting are expensive things to do. So it makes more sense to keep this scene specific so that other things can use it. Because as soon as something else in the scene needs to know about a mouse click, regardless of where it's at, then it justifies having it as a manager that that serves everybody and dispatches events so that they can use it. So it's like a one-to-many situation there. And that kind of leads me into using update. In a lot of situations, using update is okay, but it's expensive. It's more expensive, let me put it that way, than if you, say, registered your game object with some other central manager and it just looped through and made a call, like an event dispatch setup. It's actually faster than having a bunch of updates in mono behaviors throughout your entire scene. So that's also something that I wanted to show. I have a timer utils, and that's exactly what I do with okay, here it is. So timer utils, he adds his own handler basically for the on update. So update runs on its own, and here it's essentially like having this. It's at the same frame rate as the update call in a mono behavior, but one, I don't have to actually have a class be a mono behavior to get an update call, and two, this is faster on smaller devices, and three, it allows me to throttle. So if I wanted to run something at a different pace, I would not do return null. I would do wait for seconds, and then I would put a fraction of a second in there or whatever I wanted to throttle, and then everything would run at that rate. So you can imagine with animations, that's a lot of control. So anyway, that's a basic reasoning behind putting the Impact Manager back in there as a scene-centric management tool as far as speed, and also the events we have began and ended. We also have moved, and so we have also the ability to send those type of events where we can get a directional vector. So if you want to know which way they swiped, we also get that information. And I know we're not using it right now, but we were using it in some of the other control sets in the POC. So that's actually very, very nice to have later on down the line, and it might serve us later. But and the other part of it is that the other reason I moved the input off of the player and into its own manager is because we have a movement controller. The movement controller in the scene allows us to select a different object, like say the shark, and send minions to it to like distract it. Now I know we said we weren't going to do it for this version, but we might change our mind, or we might do it in later revisions. And so by selecting the shark and then clicking around it, you could send minions to it just like you send it to the bubble. And so that's why we had to create a movement controller that was abstracted or taken away from the player itself and managed in the scene. And so the movement controller receives the mouse events and then deals with those mouse events. As you can see right here, decides whether or not it's a tappable, valid tap object. So if I tap on, say, a propeller or something else like a puffer fish because I want them to expand, it'll go ahead and check whether it's a tappable object by raycasting the scene. And if it comes back false, then it just returns out and we ignore it. Otherwise, I can click anywhere I want in the scene and drive the player on. It comes back finally when the fish hits the bubble. It comes back and says move object with force. It checks to see if it has a movable, just like the player object was doing with the input controller you guys had. And it says movable.move object with force and passes the directional vectors in. It also checks whether or not it's the player is the target. And if it is, then it creates a blast ring. So as you can see, the movement controller just simply needs something to set a target. And when it does, it grabs the rigid body, grabs the movable, and then you're ready to go. And now movement controller is controlling that object and sending minions to it. So that's really the whole story on why I switched that back out. I hope that makes sense. So the other thing I wanted to point out, which I really actually appreciated, was the physics movable object. And so everything that you guys have done as far as the interfaces and so forth, the framework is still intact, and so I extended this obviously and changed. You'll see what I changed here, but I basically added the ability to move an object via physics rather than setting its X and Y and so forth. So anyway, it still works the way you guys had intended it to, and I think it looks really good. I think one last final thing that I wanted to mention is that I actually do have an audio engine that I've written for Unity. I've used it on several projects, and it's pretty easy to work with. It takes into account things like background music, crossfades, fades in, fades out, notifications on when something's finished playing, preloading, 3D, space, playback, everything else that you can pretty much conceive, the audio engine takes care of. So when I get a chance and I get some sounds, some temporary sounds, I'll go ahead and put them in there so that we'll at least have something. It also takes care of things like mute sound effects, mute background music, and takes care of like things that are ambient sound, like if you just have like dogs barking in the background or the wind or something like that, and it's not exactly a background music and it's not a sound effect, it's just ambient, and so it takes care of muting and bringing back in those sounds when somebody chooses to mute and so forth. So anyway, it takes care of a lot of audio issues, and it's pretty decent. So with that, I think that's about it. So let me know what you guys think. Um, and oh, there is one last thing. Um, I added. I noticed that you guys had characters. You named or you had actors, and in my experience with games and so forth, characters actually make a lot more sense to me in the sense of, things that are objects, because in the scene that you're interacting with, they're either good or they're bad, and so that speaks to their characteristics and so forth. So it just makes a lot more sense for me for things like that. Now, I left the player in actor. I could see that because it is the person himself and so forth. But the word just never really made sense to me in the sense of, gameplay, and it actually means something different to me in terms of animation and so forth. So I thought that was something we should talk about. I didn't want to just, rename it and remove it, but I wanted you guys to know why I put the characters folder in there as opposed to just putting everything into actors. So I think that's it. I'll talk to you guys later.